This week it's race 1 of the Wilsonian Sailing Club Autumn Series. There's a few more of us this week, with 3 altos and I think it was 4 blazes, plus plenty of others in the slow fleet, but unfortunately what we didn't have was much wind. Didn't come as any surprise because the forecast itself wasn't very promising, showing up to 5 knots of wind. In practice, unfortunately, it never even got that high, as you'll come to see. What made this particularly tricky today was the fact that we had a strong incoming tide. Now, I'm no expert in light winds. If I can feel the wind on my face, I do okay. But when it's that light fluky stuff and you just have to know how to set the sails, there's plenty better than me. But what I do know is our river. And what that meant to me was I needed to be on the line at the start, because just a few yards back could take 30 seconds to make up against this tide. And the tide is strongest nearer the middle, so I wanted to be as close to the edge as I could be. So as you can see, I started to leeward of the altos that were my main competition, but reasonably well forward. To be honest, you can't blame everyone who's not on the line, because by now I'd been on the water for say 15 minutes and I'd spent that whole time just trying to maintain position on the line. Rarely did we get a puff that would let you go forwards. So if you launched a bit late or had inadvertently let yourself go too far downriver, it would take you a long time to get back to where the line was. Okay, so next big decision to make. We're going up lines of trots. They're moorings that are tied together by a line. And there's 3 sets along this stretch of the river. The first set between it and the land, and then 2 more rows between trots before you got out into the main channel. So the question is, which one do you go up? I could go up right on the inside, but then I'd have no room to play with when the lulls came, or when I had to tack. It's one thing seeing a rope in the water that you've got to avoid, it's another thing seeing the mud underneath the surface, which you know is there but you're not quite sure how far you can push it. And getting stuck in the mud on a day like this didn't bear thinking about. So I chose the next line in. A little bit more tide, but at least I'd have some space to do some tacking. So as you can probably tell, at the moment in this race, I'm on my own. The puff that you've just seen me sailing in didn't seem to go any further downriver than the bit I was on. So I sailed off in it and left everyone else on the line. It has to be said that a blaze, although it doesn't necessarily sail to handicap in light winds, it does actually sail quite well. The trick is to stop it sticking. If it's very light and the hull sticks, you're stuffed. But if you can just keep it moving, it's got a lot of sail for a comparatively small boat and you can make headway, especially against this tide. It's not the easiest boat in the world to tack in these conditions because you need to get some roll on to pop the battens, but if you put too much roll on and dig a rack in, you stop. So basically, in these conditions, the best you're going to get out of a tack is acceptable. Of course, I might be on my own now, but I won't be on my own for long. I've said it before, but the Alto is a great boat for rivers, especially a river like ours, and they do go upwind very well. Again, in this light stuff, you would struggle to sail them to handicap. But the one advantage any fast boat has on a tidal river is that you might not go as fast as the boat can go, but any speed against the tide is better than no speed against the tide in a slow boat. Tidal rivers really do favour faster boats. I'll let you guys go, alright?
Alright, cheers.
You're going to go upwind here better than I am. So as you may have just heard, I decided to let the Alto go. There wasn't much water here between these lines of trots, and I could have called for room to tack, but we'd then both be just short tacking, getting in each other's way, slowing each other up. And the most important thing about sailing in light winds is you mustn't let the boat stop. Now that said, I deliberately slowed up here, going sort of head to wind, to make sure the Alto was clear ahead, so that I could tack in my own time. But you have to keep it moving. In these lulls, if you stop it moving and the tide gets hold of you and you start going backwards, the only way, short of a puff coming, to get some control again is sail in the wrong direction. Build some apparent wind so that you can spin back round and then start sailing upwind. But when we've only gone 200 yards in 5 minutes now of this race, going backwards would definitely feel like the wrong thing to do. Now I tacked 3 or 4 times next to this catamaran with this guy watching me. I don't know what he was thinking, probably worried I was going to hit his boat. But we'll skip through all that for when this next puff came along, because with it came the next and the altos. So the 3 of us, the 2 altos and me, are now pretty close together again. But as this leg went on, there was slightly less holes and slightly more breeze. I mean, I am talking slight here, but at least there was some breeze. And they slowly stretched away from me, right up until we got to the next corner, the point where Call Me is. We'll skip forward to there. Now what happened here is the wind died again. But we're on the corner where the tide really whistles through. If you're too close to the old jetty on this corner, there was no wind. But the further you got away, there was more tide. It really was a vicious cycle. The altos had both sort of tacked into the tide and drifted back and come back in, which allowed me to catch up. But now there were 3 of us playing this little dance, trying to get around this corner. So again, this went on for ages, so let's skip forward. By now, there's the 3 altos and me trying to get to 29. The race officer, very sensibly, had decided that the first mark of the course would be the only mark of the course, and we'd go round it and go back to the line. The problem is, we could all see the mark, but it was right out in the tide, and we couldn't get to it. You join me now, and the best puff we'd had for 10 minutes. I'm sure you can tell by the waves on the water. And I head off, out into the tide, to see if it would hold just long enough to let me get round 29. Tim and Joe, in the 3rd alto that had caught us up a short while ago, had gone further upriver. I don't know what they were doing at the start, but whatever they were doing now was working well. They clearly had the boat speed at this point in the race. Unfortunately, as you'll realise, didn't really work out for either of us. We both got to the mark and parked, and then slowly went backwards. There really just wasn't any wind around this mark. And eventually, with no wind in sight and things to do that afternoon, I decided I'd had enough and I went home. Oh well, I'll go back. Tim and Joe retired as well, but as is the way, about 10 minutes after we retired, when we were halfway back home, the next alto in the line managed to get around the mark. In fact, they both did. But I have to say, even if I didn't get a result, I actually surprisingly enjoyed this sail. It was rewarding just making any headway against the tide, irrespective of how the race turned out.